The Labour leadership has been full-throated in its support for Israel and its right to defend itself. But many in the party are deeply concerned by what they see as a more lukewarm defence of the Palestinian people than necessary, and the lack of a call for a ceasefire. So just how divided is Labour over the issue? And can Keir Starmer bring the party back together again? A little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Science and Technology Secretary, Peter Kyle. So far, Labour's been rock solid in its support for the government's posture on Israel and Gaza. Now, last night, the Israeli Prime Minister declared that the war is now in a new phase. Are you thinking about reconsidering your support for the Israeli government's actions?
It is really important that Hamas, a terrorist organisation, when it looks abroad, it sees governments and parliaments working in unanimity to challenge what is unfolding, their actions, and also their intent. So, yes, Israel, we are steadfast in defending Israel's rights to secure its border, to ensure that its citizens live in safety, and also to try and retrieve the kidnapped victims. I mean, it is a personal tragedy for each and every individual. And that tragedy spreads very far and wide because there are many people on both sides of this that have a very personal connection to what is unfolding. And we have to be very, very sensitive to that. But yes, Israel does have the right to defend itself, and we are certainly supportive of that.
Your message of unity will be heard, but not everybody in the Labour Party is on the same page here. Anna Sarwar, Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan, all want you to call for a ceasefire. And in a sense, pretty much everybody who does not owe their job to Keir Starmer seems to agree that he's got it wrong. It's probably time for him to get off the fence on this one, isn't it?
As I said, people through the Labour Party, right through the country, yearn for this conflict to end. And that is perfectly understandable. I mean, look at the horrors that are unfolding on both sides of this.
So they want you to choose a different path to the way it's resolved. Why isn't Labour leadership calling for a ceasefire when all these important figures in the party think that's the pathway?
What Keir Starmer has done is listened to all of these people in the party who have a direct connection to what is happening and an emotional connection to what is happening. He has looked at the evidence, he has looked at what is happening there in Israel and Gaza, and he has come forward with the plan for a pause for humanitarian purposes, that pause to be used so we can get food, we can get water, we can get fuel, and we can get medical supplies into where it is needed. Because, Trevor, right now, what is it, if you look at this crisis through the eyes of the people who are suffering most in Gaza, then those people need this stuff right now, today. So that is what Keir is focused on. Now,
I understand the point that you want a humanitarian pause, so does the government, but what Sarwar and Burnham and Khan are saying is you should be calling for a ceasefire. So to be clear, the Labour leader is basically ignoring the views of the three most significant figures in the Labour Party with their own independent mandate.
Keir has listened to those views and all other views that have been expressed. Now, it is a strength of the Labour Party, because we're probably the most diverse political party in Europe. It is a strength of the Labour Party that within our party we have people who have a lived connection to both sides in this conflict, and they express their views absolutely forthrightly, as they should. Keir has listened to those, looked at the situation on the ground in Israel and Gaza, and he has come up with a way forward that meets the challenges being faced by people in Gaza today. Now, what's interesting, Trevor, is he came up with this a good few days ago. Entirely at the same time that the US administration called for exactly the same. Australia did the same, and then after Keir came out, the EU did too. So we are in lockstep with our international partners, and I think all of the people and the names you've named would want Britain to be in lockstep with the international community, because that is the only way we will make a difference on the ground.
I understand. Let's just stick with this for a moment. One of the things that the group around Sarwar and Burnham and Sadiq Khan and a lot of local councils and so on say is that Keir Starmer suggested, and I know he's tried to clarify a statement that it's legitimate for Israel to cut off water and power to Gaza. Now, Israel's also, until this morning, cut off communications. Is all of that consistent with international law, which is a qualification that you always make? Is Israel really sticking to international law? Or, as many people in the Labour Party are saying, is it potentially guilty of war crimes?
I think we've seen, Trevor, in just the last week alone, what happens when you comment on individual actions as they unfold on the ground there. We have called for international law to be obeyed at all times, bearing in mind that Hamas did not obey international law when it crossed the border, went in and slaughtered 1,400 people and took 200 plus captive. But we are expecting Israel, in its response to that terrorist attack, to act within international law. We know that if you comment on individual actions in a position like mine and yours, we know that actually, as time passes and more of the facts become available, we are in the midst of battle. What we need to do is get a humanitarian pause in. We also need, as an international community, to start thinking about what could come next.
All right.
Because this will only be solved into the long term if we get back to negotiations and we start talking about a two-state solution. It's the only long-term solution to this, and we need to start with that and move backwards. We think a humanitarian pause is that first tiny step.
I understand that. Let me just very briefly put to you what I think some of your critics within the party might say, which is that your problem as a leadership is that you have to shake off the taint of anti-Semitism, which is not this leadership's responsibility, but you've got to get rid of it. So you've got to back Israel, come what may, and that you've made a cold calculation that the votes of Muslims that you might lose, 3 million or so voters, won't matter as much as getting back the votes that you lost because of the Corbyn era. In short, you're taking Muslim votes for granted.
You've covered a lot of issues in that sentence, but the one thing I disagree with is the frame that you've put around it. We're not thinking, how do we win votes or what votes we will lose at a time when there is war and conflict unfolding before us and there are human tragedies of a scale we've not seen for a very long time. There are two truths here that's unfolding. The first is that everybody has the legitimate right in a democratic society, as ours is, to advocate for two sovereign solutions within the area, the territory we're talking about. There is also, Trevor, a right and a wrong. What Hamas did was wrong, and we stand on the side of Israel within international law to defend itself. These two things can happen if we get it right, and Keir Starmer's leadership has been steadfast on this.
Well, you've
been sensitive to the long-term challenges and listening to the voices who campaign, but he's also been steadfast in support on the right and wrong issue.
Can I just ask you about something that's come up this morning? It's reported the government may be considering reviewing the definition of extremism in law. Were they to find a new definition that might make it easier for police to make decisions on the ground, would you be supportive of that?
Well, we'll have to see what they come up with, and you wouldn't expect me to say anything else, but let me just say this. We've been calling this for 4 years. There are independent experts on terror who have been calling for this for 4 years. And what is the government focused on? It's focused on vandalising statues. All of that time wasted in Parliament on these issues which do not have an impact on the ground. That could have been used in preparing for events just like this.
That's interesting. So Labour does want a review of the extremism definition.
We have supported looking at these issues and actually what the true trends in crime are. One of them are the relationship that organisations like Hamas have within our country. And secondly, we were looking at child criminal exploitation, both of which the government ignored in order to focus on cultural issues.
All right.
So yes,
let's not go back over that.
These are the pinch points. These are the pinch points where these things actually.
You've made the point. Now, I want to ask you about something that you want to talk about. You said that Labour wants to have a new regulator to be able to overrule, as far as one can make out, the decisions of existing regulators like the Financial Conduct Authority looks after banks, the Medicine and Healthcare Regulatory Agency looks after what medicines reach the market. Would your new regulator be able to tell those regulators to change their policy, to do something different?
We want an innovation office. At the moment, we have we have world-class regulation, but it's very complicated and it's actually focused on individual sectors. But when you see some of the technology that's coming forward, it crosses so many different sectors, such as AI and some of the actual physical technology that's there. So what we need to do is actually pull some of the resources there and then link it with our industrial strategy so that when we have a priority as a country, because our citizens need this technology for safety or health, or our economy needs it for growth, we can pull together and then we can fast-track.
The question I was asking you was, would they be able to tell the Medicines Agency or the Financial Conduct Authority to do something differently than what they're doing now?
They can tell them to prioritise and speed up. Because at the moment, we've seen some... I mean, for example, one regulator, a health regulator, had a backlog of 800 cases pending.
You want to speed up new drugs, which would mean abandoning either maybe trials or peer review or something else. Are you sure this is safe?
Trevor, you're mischaracterising the nature of the delay. Some of these are delayed because they're in a backlog. They're stacked, waiting to get attention. If there is something that could have the transformative potential for patients or for users or to get economic growth into our economy, then it needs to go to the front of the queue and it needs to be fast-tracked forward. Not skipping things, but making sure that we get there fast and quickly, and it's linked to our industrial strategy and our priorities as a country.
Peter Carr, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Trevor.